Hello. Welcome to the Purple Planet, where we help you drift into dreamland with the timeless and historical tales of queens, empresses, priestesses, and warriors from across the ages. In the early light of the Mediterranean, the archaeological site of Carthage presents a landscape marked by time and transformation. Scattered columns and foundations, vestiges of Punic and Roman structures, stand as mute witnesses to the rise and fall of one of antiquity's greatest cities. The surrounding terrain, once meticulously ordered, now yields to wild grasses and the subtle encroachment of the sea. For the historian and visitor alike, Carthage is more than a field of ruins. It is a locus of memory and inquiry. This is the ground upon which Queen Dido, Alyssa in Phoenician tradition, established a new polity in the 9th century BCE. Her narrative exists at the intersection of documented Phoenician expansion, local oral traditions, and the literary imagination of later Greek and Roman writers. Through these overlapping traditions, Dido emerges as both a historical figure and a mythic archetype, her life emblematic of the complexities of leadership, migration, and cultural synthesis. The origins of Dido, also known as Alyssa, are anchored in the city of Tyre, a principal center of Phoenician civilization situated along the eastern Mediterranean coast in what is now modern-day Lebanon. In the 9th century BCE, Tyre was a thriving metropolis, distinguished by its maritime prowess, vibrant mercantile networks, and complex urban society. The city's prosperity was built upon both natural resources, most notably the famed Tyrian purple dye, and a tradition of seafaring that extended Phoenician influence from the Levant to the far reaches of the Mediterranean basin. Within this urban milieu, Dido was born to King Muto, referred to in some Greco-Roman sources as Belus, a monarch whose reign reflected both dynastic continuity and the perpetual tensions of succession. Her familial environment was one of privilege, yet it was also marked by political intrigue and the pressures inherent to royal lineage. Dido's brother, Pygmalion, would later ascend to the throne, his rule characterized in ancient narratives by avarice and ambition. Dido's early life, as reconstructed from classical and Near Eastern sources, was shaped by education in statecraft, religious observance, and the management of domestic affairs, customary for women of her status within Phoenician society. Her marriage to Acerbas, also called Sychaeus, in Roman texts, a high priest of Melkart, the tutelary deity of Tyre, was both a personal alliance and a political one. Acerbas was renowned for his wealth and his devotion to Melkart, whose cult was central to Tyrian identity and expansionist ideology. The union between Dido and Acerbas is typically depicted as harmonious, yet this period of stability was disrupted by the machinations of Pygmalion, motivated by the desire to consolidate his own power and appropriate the considerable wealth of Acerbas. Pygmalion orchestrated the secret murder of his brother-in-law. The crime was concealed from public knowledge, but its repercussions were profound. Dido, upon uncovering the truth, was confronted with a critical decision: remain in Tyre under the shadow of her brother's rule, or seek autonomy elsewhere. Demonstrating strategic acumen, Dido feigned acquiescence to Pygmalion's authority while surreptitiously organizing her departure. She secured the loyalty of key supporters and arranged for the covert removal of Acerbas's wealth. The logistics of such an escape, requiring coordination, secrecy, and resources, underscore both Dido's organizational abilities and the loyalty she inspired among followers. In or around 814 BCE, a date supported by both ancient historiography and later archaeological estimates, Dido and her companions embarked by sea, leaving Tyre behind and setting forth toward an uncertain future. This episode, preserved in the writings of authors such as Justin and Trogus Pompeius, as well as in local traditions, frames Dido as a figure of remarkable resolve, intellect, and leadership capacity. Her departure from Tyre marks a transition not only in her personal narrative, but also in the broader context of Phoenician colonization. As settlers from the Levant established new communities across the Western Mediterranean, the decision to depart Tyre was not only a response to personal loss, but an act entwined with the broader phenomenon of Phoenician migration and colonial enterprise. During the early first millennium BCE, the mechanics of Dido's escape, as preserved in both Greco-Roman and Near Eastern traditions, reflect the logistical sophistication and maritime expertise that characterized her homeland. Historical and archaeological evidence underscores the Phoenicians' unparalleled skill as seafarers. Their vessels, constructed from cedar and cypress, equipped with advanced hull designs and rigging, enabled both commercial and migratory ventures across vast maritime distances. Dido, leveraging this technological advantage and the loyalty of her followers, organized a clandestine departure from Tyre, transporting not only people but also considerable wealth in the form of precious metals and religious artifacts. The inclusion of such resources suggests both foresight and a pragmatic approach to founding a new settlement. The journey itself, reconstructed from fragmentary ancient accounts and the known patterns of Phoenician expansion, likely followed established maritime routes. These pathways connected the Levantine coast with Cyprus, Crete, Malta, Sicily, and ultimately the North African littoral. Each stop would have served as both a waypoint for resupply and an opportunity to recruit additional settlers or establish diplomatic ties. One particularly notable episode described by later sources involves a stop at Cyprus. Here, Dido is said to have secured the support of several priestesses of Astarte, the chief goddess of fertility and protection. Their presence among the settlers not only reinforced the religious legitimacy of the new community, but also symbolized the transplantation of Tyrian spiritual and cultural life to a foreign shore. The Mediterranean crossing was fraught with uncertainty, navigational hazards, unpredictable weather, and potential encounters with hostile powers posed constant threats. Despite these challenges, Dido's group demonstrated resilience and adaptability, a testament to both their seafaring heritage and their leader's command. Upon arriving on the North African coast, Dido and her followers encountered indigenous Berber populations whose own histories and traditions were deeply rooted in the region's landscape. Chief among these groups was the polity led by King Iarbas, whose authority extended over significant portions of the surrounding territory. The initial contact between the new arrivals and the local inhabitants was shaped by negotiation, mutual caution, and the necessity of coexistence. The most enduring account of this interaction is the so-called Oxhide episode. According to tradition, Dido requested from King Iarbas a parcel of land no larger than what could be enclosed by a single ox hide. The request was granted, perhaps as a gesture of hospitality, or, as some scholars suggest, as a calculated limitation on the newcomer's ambitions. In a display of ingenuity, Dido directed her followers to cut the hide into thin strips, thereby maximizing its circumference and encircling a substantial tract of land on a defensible hill known as Bursa. This act, emblematic of both cunning and adaptability, became foundational to the mythos of Carthaginian origin. The successful negotiation for land provided the necessary conditions for the establishment of a permanent settlement. The transition from itinerant exile to city founder marked a critical transformation in Dido's leadership, as she shifted from the role of a displaced princess to that of queen and architect of a new society. The selection of Bursa Hill for the nascent city reflected both practical considerations, defensibility, proximity to the coast, and access to resources, and a symbolic assertion of permanence and autonomy. This phase of Dido's life, as recounted by classical historians and supported by archaeological evidence of early Phoenician urbanization in the Western Mediterranean, highlights the intersection of individual agency, collective endeavor, and cultural adaptation. The voyage from Tyre to North Africa, while shaped by personal tragedy, thus became an episode of profound historical consequence, inaugurating the rise of Carthage as a major power in the ancient world. The establishment of Carthage, Kart-Hadasht, or New City in Phoenician, represents a seminal event in the history of the Western Mediterranean. Under Dido's direction, the process of city building was both a practical endeavor and a deeply symbolic act, affirming the continuity of Tyrian heritage while adapting to a new environment. The topography of Bursa Hill provided a natural vantage point, both for defense and for overseeing the fertile plains and coastline below. Archaeological investigations have revealed traces of early urban planning consistent with Phoenician models: rectangular house plots, streets oriented to maximize coastal breezes, and public spaces designed for both commerce and communal ritual. The initial settlements likely consisted of timber and mud brick structures, later replaced by more durable stone architecture as the city prospered. Central to Carthage's identity were its religious institutions, which Dido established in direct continuity with Tyrian practice. Temples to Melkart and Astarte anchored the spiritual life of the community, their altars adorned with offerings that reflected both gratitude for safe passage and petitions for future prosperity. These cultic centers also served as loci for social organization, dispute resolution, and the codification of laws, a pattern observed in other Phoenician colonies such as Utica, Gades, and Motia. The harbor of Carthage, though initially modest, became a crucial asset. Situated along key maritime routes, it facilitated both the importation of essential goods and the export of locally produced wares, including agricultural products, textiles, and the renowned Tyrian purple dye. Over time, the harbor's infrastructure was expanded with the addition of quays, warehouses, and shipyards that would, in later centuries, underpin Carthage's emergence as a preeminent naval power. Dido's governance was characterized by an emphasis on stability, legal order, and economic integration. She presided over a council of elders drawn from the leading families among the settlers, replicating the oligarchic traditions of Phoenician city-states. This governing body, while advisory in nature provided a mechanism for balancing competing interests and maintaining social cohesion. Dido's own authority was rooted in both her royal lineage and her demonstrated capacity to navigate crisis, command loyalty, and oversee the equitable distribution of resources. The early years of Carthage were not without challenges. The nascent city faced periodic threats from local tribes, as well as the logistical difficulties inherent to rapid population growth and resource allocation. Dido's response to these pressures was marked by both pragmatism and adaptability. She initiated the clearing and cultivation of surrounding lands, organized defensive measures, and established protocols for the integration of newcomers, including both Phoenician migrants and indigenous peoples willing to embrace the city's laws and customs. The flourishing of Carthage within a generation of its founding attests to the effectiveness of these policies. Classical authors such as Timaeus and Justin describe a city bustling with merchants, artisans, and diplomats from across the Mediterranean. Excavations on Bursa Hill and the surrounding areas have yielded evidence of early urban infrastructure, streets, drainage systems, and craft workshops, indicative of a complex and rapidly expanding society. Dido's role in these developments is consistently foregrounded in both historical and legendary narratives. She is portrayed as a leader of exceptional acumen, balancing the demands of governance, economic development, and religious observance. Her legacy, as chronicled by subsequent generations, is not merely that of a city founder, but of a lawgiver, cultural mediator, and enduring symbol of Phoenician ingenuity and resilience. In sum, the founding of Carthage under Dido's rule exemplifies the synthesis of inherited tradition and local innovation. The city's rapid ascent as a hub of trade and diplomacy reflects the broader patterns of Phoenician expansion, while the specific circumstances of its origin, shaped by flight, negotiation, and adaptation, underscore the transformative power of individual agency in the making of history. With the foundation of Carthage secured, Dido's reign entered a period characterized by consolidation, institution building, and the gradual transformation of the settlement into a thriving urban center. It is within this phase that the contours of Dido's leadership, as both a political and cultural figure, are most clearly articulated in the historical and legendary record. Drawing upon the political traditions of Tyre and other Phoenician city-states, Dido established a system of governance that balanced royal authority with oligarchic council. The Council of Elders, composed of leading families among the settlers, advised on matters ranging from legal disputes to commercial policy, ensuring that a plurality of interests was represented in the administration of the city. Dido's leadership, however, remained paramount. Her legitimacy derived not only from dynastic claim, but from her demonstrated competence and the loyalty she inspired. The early legal codes of Carthage, while fragmentary in the archaeological record, are referenced in later sources as emphasizing property rights, commercial contracts, and the sanctity of religious vows. Such statutes facilitated the city's emergence as a mercantile hub, providing a framework for resolving disputes and fostering trust among diverse populations. Dido's own reputation for justice is repeatedly cited in ancient commentary, and it is likely that she presided personally over high-profile cases, further reinforcing her central role in civic life. Carthage's economic expansion was both a continuation of Phoenician commercial practices and an adaptation to the opportunities and challenges of the North African context. The city's strategic location enabled it to serve as a nexus for trade routes linking the Eastern Mediterranean with the Western Mediterranean, Sub-Saharan Africa, and eventually the Atlantic. Merchants exported locally produced agricultural goods, grain, olive oil, wine, as well as manufactured products such as textiles and pottery. Imports included metals, luxury goods, and raw materials not available in the region. Dido's administration invested in the development of infrastructure, the expansion of the harbor, the construction of warehouses and marketplaces, and the improvement of overland routes connecting Carthage with its hinterland. These initiatives not only stimulated economic growth, but also attracted new settlers, artisans, and traders, further diversifying the city's population and strengthening its position within the wider Phoenician network. Religious practice remained central to Carthaginian identity, serving as both a source of cohesion and a means of negotiating the complexities of cultural integration. Temples dedicated to Milcart and Astarte stood at the heart of the city, their rituals echoing those of Tyre, but adapted to new circumstances. Annual festivals, processions, and sacrifices reaffirmed communal bonds and the divine sanction of Dido's rule. Dido herself was closely associated with these cultic observances. As both queen and high priestess, she presided over key ceremonies, reinforcing her dual role as temporal and spiritual leader. The importation of priestesses from Cyprus, as recounted in some traditions, further underscores the deliberate transplantation of Phoenician religious traditions to Carthage. Cultural adaptation was also evident in the city's art, language, and social customs. While the core of Carthaginian society retained its Tyrian heritage, interactions with indigenous Berber populations and other Mediterranean peoples led to the emergence of a distinctive Punic culture, characterized by syncretism and openness to external influences. The population of Carthage during Dido's reign was heterogeneous, comprising Tyrian nobles, skilled artisans, laborers, merchants, and a growing number of local Africans who integrated into the city's economic and social fabric. Social mobility was possible, particularly for those who contributed to the city's prosperity or distinguished themselves in service to the queen. The presence of women in religious and, to some extent, economic life is attested in both literary and epigraphic sources, reflecting the relatively high status accorded to certain female roles within Phoenician society. Daily life in Carthage reflected the rhythms of a bustling port city. Markets filled with the sounds of bargaining and the scents of exotic spices. Workshops where craftsmen produced goods for both local use and export. Harbor quays crowded with ships from distant lands. Public spaces such as forums and baths facilitated both social interaction and the dissemination of news and policy. Dido's reign was also marked by diplomacy, both with other Phoenician colonies and with neighboring African polities. Carthage established formal and informal ties with older settlements such as Utica and Gades, fostering a sense of shared identity and mutual support. Relations with indigenous groups were more complex, requiring negotiation, alliance, and at times the deployment of defensive force. The city's rapid growth and success inevitably aroused the interest, and at times the jealousy of its neighbors, necessitating a careful balancing of power. Within her own lifetime, Dido's reputation as a just and capable ruler was celebrated in song, ritual, and popular memory. Festivals commemorated the founding of the city and her pivotal role in its survival and flourishing. Her image was invoked as a model for subsequent generations of leaders, both male and female, who faced the challenges of governance, migration, and adaptation. The Queen's reign thus represents a period of remarkable achievement, laying the foundations for Carthage's ascent as a major force in the ancient Mediterranean. Dido's capacity to integrate diverse peoples, manage economic growth, and maintain both civic order and religious piety positioned her as one of the most significant female rulers of antiquity, a legacy that would be reverently remembered, even as it was eventually reframed and embellished by later generations. As Carthage flourished, its increasing wealth and strategic importance could not escape the notice of neighboring rulers. Chief among these was King Iarbas, a prominent Berber leader whose territory encompassed the lands surrounding the new city. The relationship between Carthage and Iarbas was initially characterized by cautious diplomacy and pragmatic cooperation. The arrangement that had allowed Dido and her followers to settle on Bursa Hill was, at its core, a political compromise, one that would come under strain as Carthage grew in both influence and autonomy. It is within this context that ancient sources, most notably Justin, drawing on the earlier historian Trogus, introduce the episode of Iarbas's marriage proposal. According to these accounts, Iarbas, seeking to solidify his political position and perhaps to exert indirect control over the city, formally requested Dido's hand in marriage. The overture was not merely personal. It carried with it the implicit threat of military action should Dido refuse. Such proposals were common diplomatic tools in antiquity, serving both to forge alliances and to assert dominance. For Dido, the proposal represented a profound dilemma. On one hand, accepting Iarbas' offer might secure Carthage's safety and open new avenues for integration with the local population. On the other, it threatened to undermine the city's independence and her own autonomy as a ruler. Complicating matters further was Dido's personal vow of fidelity to Aesirpas Sychaeus, her murdered husband. In both Phoenician and broader Mediterranean culture, such vows, especially those sworn to the gods, were considered inviolable, binding not only the individual, but the community as a whole. The primary sources, while differing in detail, consistently portray Dido as deeply conflicted. She is described as engaging in prolonged deliberation with her council, weighing the potential risks and benefits of acquiescing to Iarbas's demand. The moral and political dimensions of her predicament are foregrounded. To marry would be to betray her promise and potentially compromise the city's founding ethos. To refuse would risk war and possible destruction. Dido's internal struggle is further illuminated in literary retellings, most famously in Virgil's Aeneid, where her devotion to her late husband is depicted as both a personal imperative and a public statement of integrity. While the Aeneid introduces additional layers of myth and narrative complexity, it preserves the essential theme of loyalty to both the past and to one's own principles. Faced with an impossible choice, Dido devised a solution, both dramatic and irrevocable. she announced her intention to perform a public ritual in honor of Akirbas, constructing a funeral pyre on which she would make offerings to the gods. The event was presented as an act of piety and remembrance, in keeping with established religious practice. In the presence of her people and the assembled council, Dido ascended the pyre. According to the tradition preserved by Justin, she addressed the crowd, reaffirming her loyalty to her late husband and her commitment to Carthage's independence. Then, in a final act of agency, she took her own life, casting herself into the flames. The gesture was both a fulfillment of her vow and a definitive rejection of Iarbes's ultimatum. The death of Dido has been interpreted in various ways by ancient and modern commentators. Some have viewed it as the tragic culmination of a narrative shaped by personal loss and political necessity. Others have emphasized its symbolic dimensions. By choosing death over coerced marriage, Dido asserted the primacy of moral autonomy and the collective identity of her people. Historically, it is possible that the tale reflects real tensions between Phoenician settlers and indigenous populations, as well as the complex dynamics of female rulership in a patriarchal milieu. The motif of self-sacrifice, while dramatized in literary sources, may preserve the memory of a ruler who died while defending her community's sovereignty. In Carthaginian tradition, Dido's death became a focal point for communal mourning and commemoration. Rituals and festivals honoring her memory reinforced her status as both a founding figure and a martyr, an enduring symbol of resistance, fidelity, and the burdens of leadership. Over the centuries, Dido's story evolved beyond the boundaries of Carthaginian and Venetian tradition, entering the broader literary and mythological currents of the Mediterranean world. The most influential reimagining of her life appears in Roman literature, particularly in Virgil's Aeneid, composed in the 1st century BCE. In this epic, Dido is transformed from a historical queen and city founder into a tragic heroine, her fate intertwined with the origins of Rome itself. Virgil's depiction of Dido is both complex and sympathetic. When Aeneas, the Trojan prince destined to become the ancestor of the Romans, is shipwrecked on the shores of Carthage, it is Dido who receives him with hospitality and generosity. Virgil's Carthage is portrayed as a city in its early days. Active construction, bustling markets, and the populace united under their queen's wise guidance. This vision, while romanticized, reflects contemporary Roman fascination with Carthage's past glory and its formidable queen. The narrative arc of Dido and Aeneas is shaped by divine intervention. The gods conspire to draw the two together, seeing in their union a way to secure Aeneas' safety and Dido's happiness. For a time, they are depicted as lovers, sharing power and purpose. Yet this harmony is short-lived. Jupiter, the king of the gods, reminds Aeneas of his destiny. He must leave Carthage and found a new city in Italy. The decision is not Aeneas's alone, but the will of fate and the gods. Dido's reaction to Aeneas's departure is marked by profound grief and a sense of betrayal. Virgil portrays her as both dignified and vulnerable, her sorrow a reflection of her passionate nature and her devotion, not only to Aeneas, but to her city and her vows. In the climactic scene, Dido ascends the funeral pyre she had ordered built, ostensibly to burn the relics of her lost love. There, overcome by despair, she takes her own life, cursing Aeneas and his descendants as her final act. The Aeneid's reworking of Dido's story serves several narrative and ideological functions. For Roman audiences, the tragic love affair between Dido and Aeneas provides a mythical explanation for the deep-seated enmity between Rome and Carthage, a conflict that culminated in the 250 years of War Punic Wars of the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE. Dido's curse, uttered in her dying moments, is presented as the origin of this antagonism, lending poetic causality to the historical rivalry. Virgil's portrayal also reflects contemporary attitudes towards women, foreigners, and political power. Dido is admired for her intelligence, resourcefulness, and leadership, yet she is also depicted as ultimately undone by her emotions and her inability to subordinate personal desire to public duty, an interpretation that has attracted significant scholarly debate. The tension between Dido's historical role as a city founder and her literary fate as a tragic lover encapsulates the broader process by which female figures were reinterpreted, or at times diminished, by later patriarchal traditions. The consequences of Dido's life and death reverberated far beyond her own era, shaping not only the destiny of Carthage, but also the cultural memory of the wider Mediterranean. In the centuries that followed her reign, Carthage would grow from a fledgling settlement on Byrsa Hill to one of the preeminent powers of the ancient world, a city whose influence spanned continents and whose legacy would endure long after its stones had crumbled. Carthage after Dido. Following Dido's death, Carthage maintained and expanded the institutions she had established. The city's political system evolved into a complex and enduring form of governance, a combination of aristocratic councils, popularly elected magistrates, and, at times, powerful generals. Carthage's harbor was continually improved, becoming a marvel of ancient engineering with its circular military basin and extensive merchant docks. A testament to the ongoing maritime tradition that had enabled Dido's own voyage from Tyre. Carthage's economic prosperity rested on a foundation of trade, agriculture, and manufacturing. The city controlled vast estates in the fertile hinterland and developed extensive trading networks that reached as far as sub-Saharan Africa, the British Isles, and the Atlantic coasts. Carthaginian merchants were renowned for their skill and adaptability, much as Dido herself had been. Yet Carthage's growing power also brought it into conflict with other states, most notably the rising Republic of Rome. The Punic Wars, a series of 3 protracted and devastating conflicts, would ultimately lead to Carthage's destruction in 146 BCE. The city was razed, its population displaced or enslaved, and its territory annexed by Rome. Despite this catastrophe, the memory of Carthage and of Dido persisted, preserved in both historical texts and the collective consciousness of subsequent generations. Dido's moral integrity is a recurrent motif. Her refusal to marry Iarbas, even at the cost of her own life, is interpreted as an act of fidelity, not only to her deceased husband, but to the principles upon which Carthage was founded. In this sense, her death is not merely a personal tragedy, but a political statement, an affirmation of autonomy and collective identity in the face of overwhelming pressure. The mythic accretions to her story, her romance with Aeneas, her curse upon Rome, her subsequent literary and artistic afterlives, have only amplified her resonance. For some, she is a martyr to love. For others, a model of resistance and the burdens of leadership. In all versions, she remains a figure who commands respect, sympathy, and fascination. Today, little remains of ancient Carthage, but scattered ruins and the murmurs of the past. The stones of Bursa Hill stand silent, worn by wind and time, yet the story of Dido endures. Her name is invoked in scholarly works, in literature, and in the oral traditions of North Africa. Monuments and museums in modern Tunisia commemorate her legacy, while her narrative continues to inspire new generations of writers and artists. Standing amid the ruins, one might sense the subtle persistence of her spirit, a reminder of the empires women have built, not only in stone and marble, but in the living fabric of memory. Dido was and remains a woman of two worlds, Tyre and Carthage, history and myth, devotion and defiance. Her legacy is found not merely in the city she founded, but in the enduring testimony that courage, intellect, and vision can shape the course of civilizations, leaving echoes long after the waves have washed the harbor clean.